lot of the coaches on the new staff had some kind of tie with Coach Morris before ending up at SMU. They coached with him at Clemson, or they knew him through the high school ranks. You actually played for him in high school.
I did.
How different is he when you're working with him as opposed to when you played for him?
In my opinion, not a lot. The biggest thing that jumps out at me, from knowing him from when I was 15 to now is he still cares a lot about people. Still is a huge family man, still a huge faith-based man, and in his career, it's always been faith and family first, and those two things are still the same to this day. Still an extremely hard worker, and the people around him, whether it's his players or whether it's guys working for him, he cares about their well-being. So and he was the exact same 15, 20 years ago when I first met him. So not much has changed to me.
After you played for him, did you stay in touch with him all those years, or did you sort of lose track and then have to get reacquainted?
No, we always stayed in touch. I know I talked to him a few times a year throughout college. Him and Chandler would come up and watch us practice every now and then. He has pictures of us at Cotton Bowl practice and whatnot. And as I was coming to the end of my college career, he always let me know if I wanted to get into coaching. If he had a chance to hire me, he would. And the first time we worked together was at the University of Tulsa. So it's we've always stayed in touch, and we never talked every day, but we always knew what was going on with each other.
All right, he said he would hire you if he had a chance. When did you first think that coaching might be what you wanted to do?
I've always known. I always worried because I wasn't sure what else I'd be able to do. But I knew from the time I was done playing, I wanted to be a football coach, and I knew I wanted to coach on the college level. And so it was, for me, it was more so if I don't coach, what else would I do? And I never knew. But coaching was what I had my mindset on from the time I could even begin to think about the sport.
You mentioned your playing career. You went to Texas A&M, played on some very good defenses there.
Yeah.
3-year starter, inside and outside linebacker, and eventually captain.
Yeah.
How much did that leadership role as a team captain impact the way you coach?
I think it impacted me a lot, just from the standpoint of when you are put in a leadership role, people are dependent on you. And as I think about me as a coach, my players that I coach, they're dependent on me to give them the techniques that are going to help them be successful, give them a game plan that will help them be successful, and give them all the tools they're going to need in football, and not just in football, but in life. I was telling a mother the other day, if your son were to come here, I hope he sees that I'm a good father, that I'm a good husband, that I'm a man of my faith. And those things help him transition into him becoming a man and a husband and a father. So and those are all the things I saw from coaches that impacted my life. And so that's the way I've coached, and that's the way I continue to coach.
Who were some of those coaches who had the biggest impact on you?
You look at a guy like Buddy Wyatt, that's on our staff here now. Buddy recruited me, and he recruited me, and he's from South Texas, where I'm from. Of course, Coach Chad Morris. You look at a guy like Robert Rales, who was my position coach in high school and is now over at Lake Travis. Carl Torbush, who was my position coach in college. Alan Waddell, who was my position coach in college. R.C. Slocum. The list goes on and on and on. But, all of these guys, Dennis Franchione, who's now at Texas State, all of these guys were, in my eyes, first and foremost, good men, and so that was a huge impact for me because I had a strong man in my life with my father, and I kind of saw some of those same characteristics in them.
What were your biggest strengths as a player, and do you find yourself as a coach looking at your players and saying, well, he does something the way I did it, and he looks a little bit like me? Do players remind you of yourself?
I have one. We have a few right now that, just from the standpoint of work ethic, I was never the biggest, I was never the fastest, but I took pride in being smart and trying to outwork people. And we have several guys in our unit now that I think are going to be similar to that. They won't be the biggest, they won't be the fastest, but they're going to be tough and they're going to work hard. And those were my biggest, attributes as a player, and I most definitely see some of those things now in a few of our guys.
You mentioned Buddy Wyatt coaching you when you were at A&M, and between playing for him and also Coach Malone was on the staff when you were a GA at A&M.
Exactly.
How much of a role did those two play in helping you end up here with Coach Morris at SMU?
I think it was huge. me and Coach Malone, which is one of my best friends in the world, he was in my wedding. You know, we talk all the time when we were at Tulsa and we all went our separate ways about getting back together on the same staff. You know, and in between, you know, him being at Oklahoma State, me being at New Mexico, we talk several times a week. Our wives stay in close communication with each other. My son calls him Uncle Van. You know, so it's our communication is never ending, and we always talked about, you know, whoever becomes a coordinator first or whoever gets in a certain position where we can get back together, let's make that happen. You know, and then when Coach Wyatt became available, it was a no-brainer. You know, that decision was made in less than 5 minutes. So, you know, to look at us being able to be here together again, and then with Coach Morris, you know, leading this whole thing, it has a chance to be pretty special.
When you graduated from Texas A&M, you went to Trinity Valley for a year, and then you went back to A&M as a graduate assistant. So now you're coaching guys who 2 years before had been your teammates.
Yes.
How was that transition to go from being their teammate to being one of their coaches?
I think it was really good. You know, for me, I think it was the best situation for me at the time, just because luckily I went into Texas A&M as a graduate assistant, and some of the guys I was coaching still were, I mean, I played with them. They were a lot younger, but I had their respect, you know, and a lot of times as a coach with your players, if they respect you, they trust you. And a lot of those guys respected me because a few years prior to that, they looked at me as one of the leaders on the defense. And so that kind of carried over into my role as a graduate assistant.
You have said that you want your players to have mental toughness, physical toughness, and be coachable. Were you always like that? Is that something that's born into somebody, or is that something that can be developed?
I think it's a little bit of both. You know, for me, it came pretty easy just because, you know, growing up in Bay City, Texas, and with the parents I had that raised me, it was always, you know, you attack every day. You know, you attack every day with the best you have. You in school, in sports, the way you live your life, the way you treat people, you know, and be willing to handle the things that comes your way, because life isn't always easy, you know, and so mental toughness was something that was put inside of me from the day I could pick up a bottle, you know, and it kind of just naturally carried over into my teen years and into my young adult years, into now me being a husband and a father myself. And I think sometimes you have kids that it wasn't like that from the beginning, but the more they're around it, it can kind of be instilled. So for some young men, it comes a little easier than others, but I think all of them have a chance. And then the ones that just can't accept it, a lot of times it doesn't work out for them, which is sad to say. But I mean, that's the reality. So.
When you go recruit kids, you talk to the kid, the player, you talk to his family, you certainly get a lot of feedback from the coaches, but can you identify those qualities with some accuracy, or is that something that you can only really sort out once you get them on the field and you work with them on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, you know, in recruiting, it's there's some guessing involved. You know, I think the biggest thing I try to do, you know, especially at the linebacker position, if we're going to offer a young man a scholarship, I want to make sure, number one, I had a chance to go and physically watch him practice, watch him interact with his teammates, see how his teammates respond to him. And then from there, have conversations with people in the school that have nothing to do with the football program. You know, talk to the registrar in the front office. Talk to the lunch lady that serves him every day. You know, talk to the security guard that deals with all the knuckleheads. You know, those type of people give you a really, really good read on what type of kid he is as a person, because they don't know how fast he can run, you know, but they know if he's a knucklehead or not. And so I make it a point to talk to at least 3 or 4 people in a school that are in that type of role, and that gives me a good read on him as a young man versus what I've seen.
Before you got to SMU, you were at New Mexico, you were at Tulsa, where, among other things, you taught the defensive line. Mm-hmm. Obviously, playing football as long as you have, you know sort of their job, the role of the defensive line. But having coached that position, does that impact how you now coach the linebackers who go behind them?
No question. No question. And, you know, as a defensive lineman, you know, getting lined up, your rules and responsibilities a lot of times are based off of things the linebacker says or what type of checks the linebacker makes. And so I always tell linebackers, hey, give those guys a chance to get set, tell them one thing, and let them go play. You know, to be a great defense, it's going to start with those four in front of us. So we, in a lot of ways, dictate some successes or some failures they may have. So it's our job to make sure that everybody's in the best possible situation they can be in once you get the play call and get it all lined up. So I tell them, for the most part, tell them something and leave them alone. You know, don't have them turn around looking at you asking, what'd you say? Let them go play. And if those guys are playing full speed, we'll have a chance to be successful behind them.
In another one of these interviews, Coach Smith, who's the recruiting coordinator, is also an offensive analyst, and he talked about his background as a defensive coach. Said Coach Morris brought him in so he could have a defensive mind in the offensive coach's room. At Tulsa, you also coached tight ends and H-backs.
Yes.
Do you ever find yourself at practice thinking about how the offense would do things and therefore teaching in a way to counter that?
I tell people all the time, probably the best thing I've done up to this point in my young career was coaching offense, being a defensive coach. That's the best thing I could have done for me as a defensive coach, because now when you're game planning and you're looking at certain things, you're not always just wondering what they're doing. Now, for the most part, you kind of know in a lot of situations. You know, learning how pass protections work, learning how offensively you'll block a power play or inside zone play versus a 3-man and a 4-man front. You know, those things helped me out a lot when I went back to defense the very next year. So I wouldn't, if I could go back and do it again, I would have made the same move, you know, coaching offense that 1 year, because it really helped me.
For all the players on your team, this defense is new. Under the previous coaches, they played a 3-man front, different terminology, different calls. How new is this to you? Have you played or coached in this specific defense, or is there still a learning curve for you as well?
The biggest thing with me is just getting familiar with Coach Malone's terminology that he brought with him from Oklahoma State. A lot of the things we're doing schematically are the exact same from places that we were together before. When you look at a combination of the Texas A&M stuff we did, University of Tulsa stuff we did, but the terminology a lot of times is what changes. Conceptually, you know, schematically, for the most part, I know our package. But you know, Van has picked up a few different words over the course of the years that he kind of likes better from some things we've used previously. So just getting back accustomed to those. But other than that, everything's been pretty smooth.
One of the words that we've heard ever since you and the staff got here is about the star linebacker position. Yes. He lines up across from the opposite the will linebacker. So how is a star linebacker in your defense different from a strong side linebacker in any other defense? Or is it just a cool name to put on the position?
Well, number one, it is a cool name. You know, that is one thing. But for us, the star linebacker is a guy that we consider a hybrid between a linebacker and a safety. And ideally, his role is to allow us to be able to do some things coverage-wise where we wouldn't need to make any substitutions defensively. So that's kind of what we're looking for. Whereas you look, you know, previously a lot of guys would have just the Sam linebacker. You'd have the Sam, the Mike, and the Wheel, where that Sam is a true, you know, probably bigger guy that can take on those tackles and play in the box. Well, now we're looking at that guy that kind of gives us a little more advantage coverage-wise. Maybe can play a little bit of man coverage if you need him to, but at the same time, still tough enough to get in the box and go get his nose dirty. So that's kind of what we're looking for, that hybrid kind of DB-ish, bigger DB type of body.
So before he got hurt, Shaq Randolph was playing that position. Mm-hmm. He's been a DB the whole time he's been at SMU, and he's pretty big. He's 6'4", 6'5".
Yes.
Was that a no-brainer when you got to know some of the guys on this defense? Did you immediately say, that's my guy? Or was there something about him once you started working with him that sort of jumped out at you and made you think this is the guy we're going to try at that spot?
From the first day I got here and I saw Shaq, and I didn't know none of the kids. I was hoping he was a defensive player. I was. And then when they started doing their winter conditioning and I started seeing him move around, and I knew he was a former safety, had played some corner. But like you said, you look at him, he's 6'4", he's 215 pounds. I said, that's the star, you know, and ideally, and you're not going to find a bunch of guys that look like Shaq. You're not. But that type of skill set, He's tough, and he's smart. He's smart, and so I think he has a chance to be a really, really good player at that position. And like I said, we can play him in zone, we can blitz him, we can tell him to line up out there, and you got that guy man to man, and he can do all of those things, you know. And then you look at a Chiron Mitchell who's behind him, who's a young player, who doesn't have quite as much DB skill as Shaq does, but that can still get you the same result. You know, I think both of those guys will be pretty good for us there.
Kyron Mitchell's young.
Yes.
Shaq's going to be a senior.
Yes.
Considering his whole background has been in the secondary, was there any hesitation at all about moving him up to linebacker for his last year?
None at all. None at all. And one of the biggest things we did when we started thinking that's what we were going to do, we called him in, we had a discussion with him. And the thing that you love most about Shaq is, he said, Coach, whatever I can do to help the team. You know, it didn't bother him to move to linebacker. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask, you know, what made us think that. He said, Coach, if that's what y'all think I can do to help us win, that's what I want to do. And he's embraced it and hadn't batted an eye. And you love kids like that, you know. And again, I think he has a chance to be pretty dang good.
Okay, he's older, but he's also significantly bigger than Kyron.
Mm-hmm.
Do the assignments at that position change when you go to a guy who's not as tall as Shaq?
No, you know, at the end of the day, you try to put the guys in the best positions they can be put in to be successful. We put Kyron and Shaq in pretty much the same situations all spring long, and Kyron has a bright future ahead of him. He's not as big, but he's physical. He plays hard. He's scrappy, and I call him slippery. He slips his way into plays all the time. He might have made more plays than anybody in our linebacker unit this spring. You know, and I mean big plays, sacks, TFLs. He's always doing that stuff. So I mean, as a redshirt freshman, I think his future's going to be pretty bright.
Almost since the start of spring ball, Anthony Roland was lined up with the first team defense in the middle, making the calls for the front seven. Was there something you saw in him that made you think he's the guy to sort of take charge of the front half of the defense, or was it simply everybody's new, so you got to pick one and sort of everyone's on the same page, whether you're a freshman or a senior?
The biggest thing because I knew nothing about Anthony Roland as a player at all, but I knew every day he stepped in that weight room and on that field during winter conditioning, nobody outworked him. Nobody outworked him. He's the hardest working guy I've seen since I've been here, and that really impressed me. You know, that he didn't ease into, let me feel my way around. And even if he's supposed to be going half speed, he goes full speed. You know, and so it's, you know, just from that alone, I said, I'm going to give this guy a chance to see how he does with the first group. And he took that and he never looked back. You know, and then on top of that, he's a smart dude and he's tough. You know, so I think he's going to do a good job for us.
Do you worry about guys who can't slow it down and sort of rein it in a little bit and go 100 miles an hour all the time?
I tell you this, the thing that scares me the most about Anthony is before we've stretched, before we've done any warm-ups, he comes out there and he just takes off. And I tell him all the time, Ant, if you pull something, I'm going to be mad. And so that's where I worry about him. But it's you can take a guy like him and win a bunch of football games that's smart and is going to do what you tell him to do, and he's going to do it 100 miles an hour.
On the other side, at the will, Jonathan Inga, also an experienced guy, and he's, I guess, kind of like you were when you played. He's played inside, he's played outside,
Yes.
He's rushed the passer, he's dropped into coverage.
Yes.
But moving around that much, how comfortable is he at that spot in your system? And what do you see when you look at Jonathan Inga?
When I look at Inga, I see a guy that I think has a bunch of ability. He's fast, he's explosive, he's played a bunch of football here. He's been in a bunch of big football games, and he's made plays in those football games. He got better as spring went on. You know, there was some uneasiness there in the beginning, and especially a lot with me trying to figure out me. You know, trying to figure out how we do things, because I coach him and I coach him hard. You know, and he was trying to ease his way. He'd stick his toe in that pool and just kind of stick it in there and take it out. Well, versus Anthony Roan just jumped right in, But as spring progressed, you could see Inga starting to get more comfortable, starting to understand what my expectations were, what our expectations were as a defensive staff, and ultimately Coach Morris, and understanding what we were asking of him. I put a lot on Inga because he's a senior and because I think he has a chance to be really, really good. And I don't think he quite understood that in the beginning. But now he's starting to get it. He's starting to get it. And probably those last 5 or 6 practices, I saw a different Jonathan Inga from a leadership role. And honestly, from an effort standpoint. Because I told him, I said, that'll be the thing that hurts you more than anything is effort. And he didn't understand. And so when you don't understand, as a coach, it's my job to make you understand. And so that's just as much on me as it is on him. But I'm excited about him. I really am.
You mentioned some of the younger guys who played a lot in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony Roan, Chiron Mitchell, Jackson Mitchell.
Yes.
You sometimes hear coaches at certain positions, quarterbacks, offensive line, saying, I'd like to redshirt guys. I'd like to maybe let them watch for a year or two before you kick them in the deep end.
Yes.
Is linebacker a position where you'd have any hesitation putting young guys out there? Or would you ideally like to play all older guys if you have that depth available to you?
I could care less about young or old. I want to play the best. I want to play the best, And like you look at a guy like Jackson Mitchell, who you just mentioned. Jackson Mitchell is a guy that I really, really like because I think he has a little chip on his shoulder. And I think he wants to prove sometimes that he belongs. And he's and more so because he's a walk-on and things like that. But if we were playing right now, Jackson Mitchell would play a lot for us. Because, again, I trust him. He ain't the biggest or the fastest, but he's going to be where he's supposed to be. He's going to do what he's supposed to do. He's going to play extremely hard, and so. But again, for me, those are the things that I look for. I don't look to see who's a senior, who's a sophomore, who's a freshman. I look to see who does what they're supposed to do, who's going to play really, really hard, and who's going to be where they're supposed to be. And then when you take those 3 things, throw them all in the pot, who's going to give you the most production? And we have about 5 or 6 guys that have deemed themselves worthy of that coming out of the spring. Jackson Mitchell and Nick Horton, Anthony Rowan, who we've talked about, Kyra, Shaq, Inga. It's those guys are going to help us win football games. And so I'm excited to kind of see how they progress.
In recruiting, everybody on the coaching staff has part of DFW and then somewhere else in the state. You have some area in South Texas where you grew up.
Yes.
But you also have some East Texas.
Yes.
When you're out recruiting and you're calling on coaches, do you fall back on the fact that was your home, your stomping grounds, or is it simply relationships you've built through your career recruiting for other schools?
A little bit of both. It's always funny because, you go into a school that you've been recruiting, with me going into my 10th season now, and just in December, I had on one logo. I came back in January, I had on a completely different one, and they were like, "I just saw you 2 weeks ago," So it's it's a little bit of both. Of course, back in home in South Texas, that whole area I consider home. So for me, it's going back to go visit. I'll walk into a school and it's like clockwork. I'm gonna end up sitting there talking about kids, and we're gonna talk about how your family's doing, and we're gonna talk about old Bay City stories, and they saw us play in the Astrodome and all of that. So it's that just comes with it, but I love it. I love it. And then, you look at, recruiting Oklahoma for the past 5 years, built a lot of relationships there, that I think are relationships that will carry on with me for a long time. And then some here in DFW as well. So it's relationships and it's home, it's all thrown together.
You've coached at a couple of big state schools at A&M and New Mexico and a small private school at Tulsa.
Yeah.
And in some cases, all of those schools have recruited against SMU for the same players.
Yeah.
Is it weird to recruit against your former schools?
No, not not at all. Not at all. Not at all. I mean, at the end of the day, if I got on a white shirt or a red shirt or a purple shirt, wherever I am, I want to go get the best players that fit that program. And I think the biggest thing for us is we came in and we identified what an SMU football player was going to be. You know, character, off the field, leadership, athletically, the whole deal. And once you identify that, now send me out there, let's go get them. You know, and whether it's SMU and I'm trying to get a guy from New Mexico, or whether it's I'm at New Mexico and I was trying to get a guy from Tulsa, you know, at the end of the day, we all want to win, and we're all competing against the same guys. And the one thing that has always been very helpful is you look at a situation where you're recruiting against a school you've been at, and you talk to that kid and you let them know, hey, even if you don't come here, one thing I can guarantee you is the guys at that place are good guys, because I know them, you know, and that's one part I like about it, because if, in essence, sometimes you can help, you know, and sometimes you may not help, you know, it just depends.
When you were at the other schools before you got to SMU, you probably had some sort of perception of what SMU is, and by all accounts, ever since this staff has been in place, you and the rest of the staff have been very warmly received by high school coaches, high school players. Have you been surprised by anything in terms of the way you've been received when you're out on the road?
Not really. Because of who our head coach is, honestly, no. You know, I think there is a ton of Texas high school coaches that were really rooting for him, because that's what he is, and that's what he is at heart, and he takes a bunch of great pride in that. And I think more importantly, all those guys were ready for him to come back home. You know, and so once I can remember when this job came open, the first name that you start hearing was Chad Morris, because everybody wanted to get Chad Morris back to Texas. So once I think it became official, our reception and how happy people are, and it didn't really surprise me at all, because of who our head coach is.
Now that you work with him rather than play for him, do you call him Chad instead of Coach?
You know what? I might be 40 or 50 years old, and I'll probably forever call him Coach. You know, it's you know, you look at Buddy Wyatt, I continue to call him Coach Wyatt. You know, I think that's just one thing that is kind of in me, and when a guy's been your coach, that's Coach. You know, and so it'd be weird for me to call him Chad.
Before we get to the guys you're recruiting, you now have a spring practice in the rearview mirror. When you look back, look at the film, evaluate your guys, overall, what do you think of the way your group of linebackers learned you and your terminology and your expectations for them in this defense?
You know, looking back, I think the biggest thing I'm hoping they picked up on is my energy once I get on the field. You know, I tell them all the time, once we hit the grass, we're not easing into it. You know, and they know they're going to get coached hard. They know they're going to be held to the highest level of expectation. But on the flip side, knowing that I'm going to jump on them harder than anybody, but I'll praise them higher than anybody when they do right. Knowing that our personal off-the-field relationship is more important to me than on the field. Because I tell them all the time, ideally, I want to know that you're okay as a person. You know, I want to know if something's going on with mom, or if, you know, you're having issues with your girlfriend. You know, so I hope they know, most importantly, that I care about them, you know, genuinely. And I'll be there for them if they need me. From the standpoint of the defense, each and every practice, mentally, they got a lot better. So when we walked off the field after practice 15, I felt in my heart we could go play a game and not make a ton of mistakes. And at the end of 15 practices, I think that's a pretty good place to be in. Now, I'm glad we didn't have a game at the end of 15 practices, but I felt confident enough to know that if we went and played, we wouldn't make a lot of mistakes. So we're going to pick up from there and keep building on that.
You mentioned that you want them to know you're there for them in non-football ways. Is it sometimes hard to separate the two? As a coach, obviously you want to pull the best performance possible out of them on Saturday, but then you also have a relationship with them to, you know, make sure they graduate and make sure they go to class and do everything they're supposed to do. Is it ever hard to separate the two?
It can be. It can be if you. I try not to let myself get too engulfed in Coach McDaniel, the coach. You know, because when you do that, that's when you lose sight of the fact that, man, these are young men that have a lot going on in their life. You know, it never fails if you get an email or something from somebody in academics saying, you know, so-and-so didn't do right today. A lot of times you go talk to them, they might have just broke up with their girlfriend, you know, or their mom or their dad might have just took their car away. I mean, it's just, at the end of the day, they deal with those type of things that you never, it's easy to lose sight of if you let yourself. There's a lot more going on in their lives other than football a lot of times than there is in ours. And then with us being older, we know how to kind of manage it a little bit better. So I think if you get engulfed too much in the ball, you can lose sight of the fact that they're 17, 18, 19-year-old kids, you know, and we were all that at one point. So you have to really work on that piece, not losing sight.
When freshmen get to college, they're often so excited to get started that sometimes their emotions can get a little ahead of themselves. As a coaching staff, you guys are all entering your first season. Is the excitement different when it's your first season at a new school, a new job, or is it sort of just like every other year for you? Because as you said, you're older, you manage things a little differently than students do.
I say yes and no. You know, it's for me, the challenges of winning a football game at this level kind of all the same and to a degree, but the excitement of knowing you just went out there and beat somebody and you played harder than them and you scored more points and you made more tackles, I think is extremely satisfying, and I look forward to that whether I'm at SMU or whether I'm at Highland Park Middle School. You know, it's just the thrill of going to compete. Now, when you're coming into a situation where you know you have some mountains to climb, in some people's opinions, that challenge I think puts it a little bit, makes the pot a little bit more sweeter, you know, versus you coming into a situation where, you know, they're the conference champs and people expect you to be what you were the year before. Well, now when you do things that people weren't expecting you to do, I think it tastes a little bit better, you know. So I think those are the things we're looking forward to here. You know, I don't think a lot of people, and who knows, but we're expecting a lot out of us this year. So we'll see.